Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sneha Raghavan, Senior Researcher and Head of Asia Art Archive in India, based in New Delhi. We are an overseas hub of Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong. For those of you who are less familiar with AAA, Asia Art Archive was established in the year 2000 in Hong Kong in response to the urgent need to document and make accessible the multiple recent histories of art in the region. We achieved this mission by digitizing artist and scholarly archives and making these accessible online on our website for free for research and educational purposes. We also develop research projects, have a library with secondary source material for reference located in Hong Kong, and organize a robust series of programs. Today's talk that we are co-presenting with the Hauser and Wirth Institute is an introduction to a research collection that AAA has been working on over the last 1.5 years and which will be launched soon, the Zahoor Akhlaq Archive. Zahoor Akhlaq was one of the most influential artists and art educators from Pakistan. Born in Delhi in 1941, Akhlaq migrated to Karachi as a child following the partition of the subcontinent. He attended the newly established National College of Arts in Lahore, previously the Mayo School of Art, as part of the initial cohort. Upon graduation in 1962, he became a lecturer at NCA, where he continued to teach for several decades, becoming head of fine arts in 1979. Akhlaq also received postgraduate degrees in printmaking from Hornsey College of Art and Royal College of Art in London in the 1960s, and later studied at Yale University in the late 1980s on a Fulbright fellowship. He was an early experimenter in installation and sculptural forms, and is renowned for his prolific work in painting and print, drawing on traditions of calligraphy and miniature painting to arrive at a truly unique practice of artistic modernism. The Zahoor Akhlaq Archive comprises a large collection of photographic materials, writings, correspondence, sketchbooks, drawings, and other papers. It traces the artist's development from his student years to his subsequent role as a teacher and administrator. And if I may say so myself, it is a truly phenomenal archive, both in terms of how significant it is for art and cultural history, given the tremendous range of materials it carries, as well as for the insight it offers into Zahoor Akhlaq and the art fields and milieus that he inhabited and constituted. At Asia Art Archive, this digitization and research project was conceptualized and developed by John Tain, who was formerly head of research at AAA. The project team based on site in Lahore comprised of Samina Iqbal, who is one of our speakers today, together with Nabiha Khan and Kadir Jhatyal. Other team members at AAA working on the project include Leah Lam, with support from Pakoma and Stephen Lam, and Pallavi Arora and myself from AAA in India. The Zahoor Akhlaq Archive has been made possible with permissions from the estate of Zahoor Akhlaq, and for this, we are most grateful to Noorjahan Akhlaq. The digitization and processing of the Zahoor Akhlaq Archive by AAA was made possible with the generous support of the Hauser and Wirth Institute, with whom we are co-presenting this event today. As part of this project, in late 2023, we invited two guest scholars, Simone Villa and Samina Iqbal, our speakers today, as research fellows by providing them early access to the Zahoor Akhlaq Archive to explore and engage with materials within the archive and to present their research outcomes. We're extremely grateful to Simone and Samina for accepting this invitation and for their effort to go through an archive that is still in the making and to share their research findings with us today. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers in the order in which they will make their presentations. Dr. Simone Villa is Elise Richter Fellow at the Institute of Art History, University of Innsbruck. She currently directs the research project, South Asia and Central Europe, the mobility of artists and artworks between 1947 and 1989. Her research focuses on artistic and cultural mobility between the regions of Southwest Asia and East, Central, Southeast Europe in the modern era. Villa's publications include Modern Art in Pakistan, History, Tradition, Place, published in 2015, and more recently, the co-edited volume, Collecting Asian Art, Cultural Politics and Trans-Regional Networks in 20th Century Central Europe, published in 2024. Dr. Samina Iqbal is an artist, art historian, curator, and academic. Her research spans South Asian modern and contemporary art, examining the respective open-ended and dialectical tensions between international, national, and local stylistic concerns of the region as a parallel dialogue to the Western canon. Iqbal has been an independent researcher with Asia Art Archive since 2016 and has led major projects digitizing the archives of Salima Hashmi and Zahoor Akhlaq. She taught studio arts and art history courses at various universities in Pakistan and the USA, including Virginia Commonwealth University, Appalachian State University, and Beacon House National University. She is currently Associate Professor in the Department of Media Studies, Art and Design at the Lahore School of Economics. Before I invite Samina to begin, Simone, to begin her presentation, I would like to share that our format for the evening will be a 30-minute presentation each by our two speakers, followed by a discussion, which I will moderate. We encourage the audience to please use the Q&A feature for all questions and comments, and we'll do our best to take them up if time allows. Please note that this event is being recorded and the recording will be made available on AAA's website soon. Over to you, Simone.
Thank you, Sneha. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I would like to thank Asia Art Archive and Hauser Wirth Institute for the invitation to take part in the project, Thinking About and Engaging with Zahoor Akhlaq's Archive. Thank you again, Sneha, Özge, and the rest of the team at AAA. I enjoyed our conversations and exchange of thoughts in the meetings that we had together with Samina. I would also like to thank Nurjahan Akhlaq for her patient support since many years, without which my previous studies of Zahoor Akhlaq's life and work would not have been possible. Zahoor Akhlaq's work can be brought in connection with an aesthetic that is marked above all by his endless exploration of space as an abstract system. Through study visits to London and Yale, along with exploratory travel in South, Central, and West Asia, the artist developed a visual language based on the spatial and structural division of a Mughal miniature painting and a traditional manuscript page, the foundation of which is a gridded pictorial ground and a rectangular frame. These three works from different periods show quite well how Akhlaq transformed pictorial notions of space. To the left, you see a large acrylic on canvas from 1994, untitled From the Bhutto series. In the middle, the Shah Jahan triptych in acrylic on wood from 1981. And to the right, the work View from the Tropic of Illegitimate Reality from between 1975 and 78. Conceptually, these works are based on a gridded surface and a delineated inner space which is barely visible in the work on the right, almost totally absent in the triptych, but clearly visible in the work on the left. The Shah Jahan triptych in the middle is the result of his many visits to the London museums, where he studied the components of a Mughal miniature painting. Akhlaq's focus is on the horse riders here. He positions them centrally on a gridded surface, alternates their appearance with color accentuations so that they appear either on or within the grid. In short, this allowed him to make a statement on a fundamental component of a Mughal painting, the handling of space. So, the basic structure of Akhlaq's work has already been defined in the early 1970s through his use of the grid and the frame as a conceptual principle. At this point, he was able to establish a connection between traditions such as Mughal painting, but also with modernism on a geographically broader scale. By invoking the grid as a structural phenomenon, he was able to connect past and present, old and new, but also transcend cultural boundaries. Transcending cultural boundaries is an experience Akhlaq made also physically through different kinds of travel and mobility. Born in Karachi in 1941, educated in Lahore in the early 1960s, he received the British Council Scholarship for postgraduate study, living in London from 1966 until 1968, traveling back to Pakistan by road via Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan. From Lahore, many regional road trips and journeys followed, connecting him with the wider Muslim world. This surely brought a recognition of an intertwined cultural heritage. He also traveled to East Asia, to Thailand in 1987, and from 1987 until 1989, he was at Yale University in New Haven as a Fulbright Fellow, together with his family. They returned to Pakistan, from where an extensive trip to India and then also to Indonesia followed. In 1992, the family moved to Ankara, where Akhlaq became visiting professor at Bilkent University. They remained there until 1993. The period after was mostly spent in Canada with trips to Pakistan, and of course, there are many more travels that I did not mention. For today's presentation, I'm interested in taking the artist's handling of space as a starting point from where to explore visual links between formal foundations of his painterly work and places that the artist visited, along with details that he captured en route through the lens of the camera. Drawing on the artist's extensive photographic archive, which is part of the Asia Art Archive collection, I will examine the ways in which mobility, artistic form, and geography are interconnected and can therefore encourage us to consider form as existing within and outside the work. Of course, we can also think about what happens in the archive, about its composition, about the selection that takes place through choices made by those that Jacques Derrida refers to as the archons, the guardians of the archive, the authors or inventory creators, the readers or researchers. I have to say that at this point, I'm not making a distinction between negatives, positives, duplicates, or reflectives, all of which forms part of the Zahoor Akhlaq archive. I'm aware that at some point, this needs to be included in the discussion. Okay, Zahoor Akhlaq's understanding and perception of modernism cannot be viewed isolated from his mobility, his regionally, but also trans-regionally situated touristic and exploratory travels. The late Shahrazad Alam, Akhlaq's widow, a potter, and Nur Jahan Akhlaq, a multidisciplinary artist, and the late Kap's daughter, both recalled that extensive exposure through travel had left a deep mark on the artist's work. In 72 and 73, we made these extraordinary trips to Kabul and Tehran, and Zahoor explained Persian and Turkic influences on the subcontinent. I didn't know they existed, frankly, but at these places I looked at architecture and paintings and color schemes and designs. This influence entered both my work and his. And many years later, the artist sums up the importance of travel in his life by saying, "I love to meet people and I adore traveling. I enjoy observing different cultures, peoples, their traditions and lifestyles." What I encountered in the archive are recurring images of landscapes, of built, urban and non-urban spaces, landscape structures, architecture, objects and details thereof, photographed across certain geographies. I have arranged them according to their geographical origin, the basic forms photographed, spatial relations, and partly in such a way that formal, spatial, and geographical overlaps become visible. What interests me, apart from what was photographed, is the fact that many photos can be linked to certain geographies and ultimately to Akhlaq's artistic work. Furthermore, I'm interested in exploring in what way they transgress or bridge not only geographies, but also cultures and tradition. Let's have a look. Many of the images I'm showing were probably taken by the artist. However, it is also very possible that since Sherizad Alam and Zahoor Akhlaq traveled together most of the time, many photographs were probably taken by Sherizad, possibly also by others. I just want to acknowledge this. What you see here are images of doors, simple wall openings, entrances, exits. As such, they capture light and darkness, but they also function as forms and shapes that frame something. They outline something. They delimit space, or they create a space. I would even go a step further and say that many of these images capture transitions from one spatial composition to another. Most of these images are reflected from a folder labeled Kanpur Chakwal. Kanpur is in the Punjab region of Pakistan, south of the city of Bahawalpur. Chakwal, on the other hand, is south of Rawalpindi. Please also note that we see less and more sophisticated built environment in urban and rural settings, revealing the photographer's interest in capturing these differences. If you look at the juxtaposition of these two different architectures, one with an open door and a brick structured surface, the other with a small and almost circular opening in the middle of a smooth surface. While both the door and the circular wall opening interrupt the surface structure of the respective wall, they also lead to darkness, juxtaposing light and dark. And I think this works really well with the reduced color lines in this image. And I find that light against dark is also at play here. These images are still from the Kanpur Chakwal folder. The reason I arranged these three images in this sequence is because I want to see them as something about relationships between different spaces, which can create the tension. I found a lot of photographs of windows and arcades. Viewed together, the impression is created that it is about lighting conditions, how they affect a room, a wall, a landscape, how light shapes, but also structures. These images are a mix from an Istanbul folder with unknown date and a Kanpur folder from 1990, thus from a later trip to Kanpur as the one before. Doors, windows as passages and transitional zones are also a concern in these photographs. They frame something and create different spatial compositions. A further component can be vistas, distanced views, and the way these are guided by architectural lines. These images are from an Indian folder, referring to a long and extensive journey across India. How light or the absence of light affects an image and a space is captured here during the same trip to India from inside a monument. In 1991, the same year as the India photographs were taken, Zahoor Akhlaq had an exhibition at the newly opened Ziggurat Gallery in Karachi. The title of the exhibition was Luminous Evidence. borrowed from the writer Sara Suleri, who had used this description in her writing about the artist's work when it was displayed at Yale in 1989. These works are informed by principles of formal structures that he developed in the 1970s. But they also clearly employ the window character, something which contemporary writers who visited the exhibition in Karachi have pointed out. Mohammed Jami, who reviewed the exhibition for The Star, wrote about the window variations in these works. And Gregory Minisale, who also wrote about the exhibition, saw the quality of the windows which reveal miniature-like details up close and larger formations with light from a distance. Akhlaq played with the flat, two-dimensional character of the picture surface and contrasted this with a suggested view into the window. The work to the left was in the Karachi exhibition of 1991, and the one in the middle probably also. But the work to the right was made shortly after, while the artist and his family resided in Ankara from 1992 until 1993. So this work is in the collection of the Bilkent University in Ankara, where Zahoor Akhlaq was teaching. Bülent Özküz, who was dean when Akhlaq was at Bilkent, told me that the painting has been hanging in the dean's office at the university since 1993. It is thus part of an extensive collection of international art assembled by the founder of the university, Ihsan Doramachi. There are quite a lot of photographs in the archive from different, probably 2 trips to Turkey. These images are from a folder titled Istanbul 87, in which tombstones with calligraphic inscriptions are photographed along with manuscript pages. The focus is on inscription and the signature. And this reminds me of the artist's work from the late 1960s and early 1980s, in which he referenced traditional farmans and tugras, mostly in etchings and ink drawings. Farmans are decrees issued by the Sultan, traditionally in the form of long scrolls. The Sultan's name and titles are applied in tugra form at the top of the scroll. What you see here are images from a folder titled Antakya. You probably remember Antakya being in the media about last year's terrible and devastating earthquake, killing more than 50,000 people and destroying hundreds of thousands of buildings. Antakya, in the Hatay province of Turkey, is close to the Syrian border and known for its rich and diverse cultural heritage and history. It is quite far away from Ankara, but I remember Nurjahan telling me that while they were in Turkey, they traveled extensively. Her father, she told me, was particularly interested in landscape, the mountain formations, and Konya, where they saw the dancing dervishes, which left a lasting impression on the artist. Well, what you see here are some of the many photographs that capture the trip to Antakya. While there are some photographs of the visit to the famous Antakya Museum and its mosaic collection, there are many more images of the town and its surrounding area. We see narrow streets squeezed in between houses and architecture. We see landscapes, but we also see different wall structures, stone buildings, which create open spaces, enclosed spaces, and spaces like this one here, framed to reveal different layers or areas or zones where built and natural landscape seemingly meet. Back to Pakistan, probably the Punjab region again. We find many photographs capturing different architecture, more or less formal, of walls built with stones and bricks. The houses and buildings that were captured in these images, as in the previous one and indeed throughout the archive, are a cross-section of simple, mundane, but also monumental architecture, cutting across cultural heritage. I would like to suggest that in these photographs, the high-low distinction with hierarchical value relation is replaced with a horizontal approach, appropriate of the cultural reality that the artist encountered while traveling and capturing different cultural landscapes. I'll come back to this thought in a little while. The notion of where natural landscape ends or begins and at what point it meets and intersects with urban and rural built space also plays a role in these images. These images are from an India trip again. Note the different perspectives that arises from different spatial conditions here. Take the picture on the far left, a street photographed from the top of a staircase. On the left, a built wall, on the right, possibly a rock face. Then clockwise from left to right above, two images where a long wall creates a spatial division between what you see in front of the wall and what you see beyond it. The image below shows a spatial organization of what looks like an archaeological site. What I find striking about this series of photos from a trip to Palmyra, probably in the late 1980s, the photographs are from a box titled Greece, Palmyra, is the setting of the archaeological site against the backdrop of an open space, a landscape. What these photographs capture are spatial dimensions created by both massive architectural remains and smaller remains. But overall, it is intense, large and impressive, with details in an outdoor setting in its original location. Photographs from Sri Lanka and Indonesia folders are quite often of nature and landscapes, such as these ones. What we see are natural and artificial lines that create transitions or boundaries, but also meeting points. But there are also photos taken in Bali which remind us perhaps of those doors, windows, passages, and framings which I showed you earlier, from trips to the Punjab, to India, or to Turkey. So let me try to summarize. If we consider mobility as a defining feature of artist Zahoor Akhlaq's life, then according to the photographs shown today, he has developed a sense for places and their conditionality, which manifests itself mainly through architectural spaces. Spatial dimensions also emerge where architecture meets nature or vice versa. What strikes me in relation to the archive is that there are hardly any images of his travels in Europe. He did visit several places in Europe. The lack of photographs may be due to the fact that when he traveled in Europe, he did not have a camera or he was not in the company of someone who took photographs. In an interview with Gregory Minisale in 1991, the artist spoke about the importance of the division of space as something he sees most pronounced in Oriental paintings. In the same interview, he also spoke of his interest in architecture, in Muslim architecture, its structural components, which, according to the artist, create a dialogical space in which the viewer is free to move and imagine. He put this in opposition to the Renaissance perspective in which, as he said, I quote, "A whole worldview is forced on the viewer, a whole rationalized system of perspective which is swallowed whole without it even being perceived." End quote. The three-dimensional and mathematically very calculated space condition, which defines a Baroque city such as Rome, but also other places in Europe, reveals spatiality in very different ways, through drama, emotion, and movement. Considering the artist's many journeys and the photographs that make up the archive, I would like to suggest that it is not only the conception of space in painting, but also the way space is conceived in urban and rural settings through architecture, in the way that people's lives revolve around built environment, in the way that space is conceptualized through different kinds of walls, doors, wall openings, blinds, welcoming spaces, etc. All of which, as these photographs reveal, interested and inspired the artist. The recurring photographs of the spatial organization of people's living conditions also remind us that the artist was interested in replacing hierarchies and vertical value relations, which in turn reminds us that these boundaries defined much of post-war modernism. The different spatial conditions that Zahoor Akhlaq encountered, observed, and photographed on his travels supported his thinking about space, which ultimately informed his visual artistic concept and vision of modernism. This modernism centralizes the way in which visual culture is anchored locally, regionally, but is capable of transcending these boundaries. In doing so, the artist challenges not only geographical boundaries, but also the boundaries between disciplines, such as Islamic, South Asian, and Asian art, as well as those of Western art. The three artworks I showed at the beginning are examples of an artistic modernism in which different traditions and painterly concepts come together. Mughal miniature painting, the layout of a traditional manuscript page with demarcated inner and outer spaces, the modernist brushstroke, the grit associated with both tradition and modernism, and the human figure, which in the left work represents the body of a dancer, in the middle, the bodies of three horse riders, and in the right work, a fragmentary silhouette of a human figure. The position and condition of these different bodies in relation to space can best be analyzed by taking into account the artist's experience through mobility across geographies, which is why the artist's archive is so important. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Simone, for that wonderful presentation. I also thank you for the sheer sort of effort that I know it would have taken for you to go through the vast photographic materials while they're still sort of in a somewhat sort of messy state. They're still being sorted, places are still being identified, years are still being identified. So thank you so much for that effort. But I think the point that you're making through your presentation is certainly one that I think only now more and more with scholarship, especially such as yours, that people are beginning to sort of reckon with, which is how travel really sort of shapes life worlds, but also worldviews of an artist. So many thanks for that. We will now move on to our next presenter, and I'd like to invite Samina Iqbal.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Neha. Thank you, Simone. Wonderful presentation. I would like to first thank Asia Art Archive Hong Kong and Hauser and Wirth, of course, for their generous grant in helping us digitize Zahoor Akhlaq's archive. I must make a special thank you to Nabiha Khan and Kader Jatyal, who have been amazing in this journey of like digitizing the archive. Of course, Noorjahan Akhlaq, thank you so much for accommodating us while we were going through this tedious process, which was prolonged for more than a year. So I'm very happy and excited to share my findings from the Zahoor archive, and the wonderful thing that I had the opportunity to go and visit all the monuments. So let me just share my screen. And when I started working on the archive, of course, I was involved in like digitizing the archive. Photographs, of course, just briefly saying there were like about 8,000 documents that we scanned, and about 7,000 photos, which, like Sneha said, we're still sorting and figuring out how to classify them. The reason I took up the task of taking Zahoor sculptures as like the topic of discussion for this presentation today is because a lot of people know Zahoor only as a painter, and yes, some of his sculpture works are also in the public domain, but not so much is known about his work in the public sphere in terms of like commissioned works. One of the works that I was familiar just before starting this project was the Maritime Museum Fish, which is in Karachi. So what I am presenting today on Zahoor Akhlaq's public sculptures are displayed in various cities of Pakistan. And I'm just giving you a glimpse of all the 5 monuments that we will be looking at today. I'm going to go in depth on 2 of the monuments, and in the interest of time, I might not be able to go over the other 3. But I do have to say this, that this is a work in progress, and there are many exciting findings that I came across with this venture. So I will be using Zahoor's name as Zahoor because that's how he liked to be called. So the first one that we're looking at is like the Crescent and Moon Sports Complex. The Crescent and Star, I'm sorry, that's a typo there. Sports Complex Islamabad, which was made in 1976. The second one, we will be looking at monumental sculpture and environmental design, Tarbela Dam, Haripur, which was made in 1983. And then we look at inaugural sculpture that was placed in Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture's inauguration when the university was established in 1992. We look at Fasting Buddha. The date of this sculpture is still in research progress, but it was gifted to NC in 1996. I see a reference made of this sculpture in Raja Kona books as 1986. So I'm still looking into the dates. The fish sculpture was the last one, which was at Maritime Museum from Zahoor's life, which was done in 1997. So my today's presentation is actually going to not only highlight the 5 sculptures in the public domain, but also explore the dynamic or the dialectic relationship between patrons' objectives, public perception, and artistic expression. So mainly I'm also looking at like how much an artist like Zahoor was able to reflect in terms of his public projects, his freedom of his artistic freedom. The other aspect that I share in this presentation is the overtime change that takes place in the works of these sculptures in public domain with the socio-political change in the country. And as we all know, Pakistan goes through that a lot. So the first one that I'm showing you is the Crescent and Star at the National Sports and Cultural Complex, dated 1976. And what I'm showing you is it is located between the sports complex and Chakarpadiya Hills, a tourist spot in Islamabad. The sculpture in the making so this is on the left side, you're looking at the maquettes, the photographs were found in Zahoor's archive. Before looking at these in the archive, I was just not familiar with this work at all. And I didn't know that this was made by Zahoor. And and on the right side, you see the actual to the scale execution of the work. So this project was commissioned by, the interesting history of this is that it was an intriguing case how the government money could be used for forwarding a political agenda. And secondly, how the changing political situations impacted the monument. What we're looking, like I mentioned, was that, the maquettes that I mentioned, and then I'm showing you what was actually made. These photographs are Zahoor's archives. The project was commissioned by Abdul Hafiz Pirzada, a founding member of Pakistan's People Party, who held several ministries between 1971 to 77 under Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's government. The project was commissioned and supposed to be inaugurated simultaneously with the inauguration of the Sports and Cultural Complex of Islamabad. A lot of misinformation was available on the internet, which was coinciding the making of this monument with the Islamic conference, but that was held in 1977, and this was done in 1976. So the more likable thing was that, it was made for the inauguration of the sports complex. During my research, the way I conducted my research was talking to a lot of Zahoor's friends and his colleagues, and I've discovered many interesting things about this project. So Zahoor was the chief designer for this project, but then there were other people involved in the execution of this project, which involved Ahmed Khan, also an artist, and Muhammad Asif Khan, who was also an artist, and both taught at National College of Arts, Lahore, where they were colleagues with Zahoor al-Akhlaq. The architect Abdul Rahman also taught at NCA, and he was involved in the making of the to-the-scale plans of this monument. Some students of the NCA were involved, and a few commercial ceramists were also involved, and I will come back to the ceramist in a minute. But if you see the project, the monument, it looks like it's made of steel. I must make a note here that most of the government projects back in 60s and 70s came to the artists through NCA. So if the government was going to commission something, it was sent to National College of Arts, and there were people who were considered as capable of doing it. They were assigned to do the project. At least this was the case in the first 3 decades of Pakistan's establishment. The most interesting finding of this monument research was its initial making, and I found a few pictures. Let me just take you there. So these were the terracotta reliefs which were laid inside the wall of the crescent and star monument. And this just really clearly shows like how the government was using the money for promoting their agenda. And I want to show you a few pictures, and then I come back and talk about this again. So, as I mentioned before, that the project was commissioned under the People's Party ruling. So the inner wall of the crescent was lined with large figurative terracotta images. And the first one that you are looking at is showing 2 men in the background. One is holding a whip and flogging a man who is kneeling down in front of him, offering him crops or some kind of offering. The second figure on the right, you see he's dragging a woman who has her hand in a protection posture, protecting her child. Seems like really a scene from like a feudal misconducts which were conducted, and so supporting, like, really suppressing the poor. The second panel shows that, if you see in the background, so I'm sorry, there were only 4 photos which were discovered, but these were not from Zahoor's archive. This was during my research. I discovered these photos. So the second panel, if you look at it right here, is showing 3 figures who are marching with flags in their hands. And of course, the flags are of Pakistan. You can see the crescent and star on the flags. In between these 3 panels, there were like textual panels, like, they had inscriptions on it. My guess is that there were actually at least like three panels of figurative reliefs, and then about three panels of like textual reliefs on the back. Unfortunately, there wasn't much that I could read what the panel said in the background, but reading the first few words of this panel, so I was able to read the dates, and then this panel right here, the date is 1967, which is really important because that is when People's Party was founded. And J.A. Rahim actually wrote the agenda or the manifesto of People's Party, which read, and looking at these last four lines, I could just make out that there was a agenda of People's Party that was inscribed here. So what these four lines read here, just looking at the words, I looked up the, manifesto and found, which it said is like, and I'm translating this, it is called as Islam is our religion, democracy is our politics, socialism is our economy, power lies with the people. So the first word of the last five lines give the clue that it was the registration of the People's Party's manifesto. The second plaque, that if I can just show you from the distance, right here, I could only read the date 1971. And I'm not sure what the text says here, and I'm still working on finding more resources on that. However, the date 1971 is significant because this is the year that People Party had its first term of government in Pakistan. I've been told that the inauguration date of the monument was pushed back and it was completed in a haste. So these pictures were taken right after the completion of the monument. And the gentleman standing on this extreme right is the person who actually took the photos, but I was provided these photos by this person in the middle standing here. His name is Sadakat Parvez, and he was the one who provided these photos. So looking at this, I've been also in the interviews, I was informed that Zahoor was not happy to add this part into the monument, but because it was a government project, he didn't have much say in that, and he just had to put up with this, For that, Muhammad Asif Khan, who was teaching at NCA, he was responsible for making these reliefs with the help of two commercial ceramicists who were hired from, there's a ceramic factory near Lahore, which is called as Shadra, from where they were, brought in, and this work was done in a neighbor's house, close to Zahoor's house, and the person whose house it was made, I had a conversation with him, and he remembered, that Zahoor barely came to see these reliefs, but other people were more involved, coming and looking after, while these were in process. However, what happens is, with the toppling of Bhutto's government in 1977, at the end of it, in 1978, these reliefs were damaged and destroyed and removed. Initially, I was thinking they were removed because they bear these figurative imagery. But then, of course, after realizing that, it's really carrying the manifesto of People's Party, it made clear that, People's Party had to be completely wiped off from this, from the scene. So therefore, these were all destroyed. What is I find interesting are these photos, which I have taken from Zahoor's archive. And I'm not sure when these photos were taken because these do not show any of these relief on the monument. Either they were taken after the terracotta reliefs were removed or probably right before they were placed on it. But I've been told that the monument was completed in a haste because they pushed back 4 weeks of inauguration time so that they had to finish everything in a rush. I find interesting that there was no trace of these images in Zahoor's archive. Talking about this more like, in terms of the crescent and star, which is actually very, very popular in Islamabad and also used in like, patriotic songs where people have like, used that as a backdrop. This is an image that I borrowed from a YouTube video. So also to give you a scale of this, like, I do not have measurement of this monument, and it is, to give you a size, it's like, probably over like, 60 feet on the highest side. And so this is me standing in front of it to give you a scale of it. One thing I noticed with Zahoor's public monument is that, like Simone was mentioning, engagement, like his spatial engagement with the monument and the surrounding was super important. So every single inch of the monument was designed and treated. So when you look at the floor, you see these geometric shapes, the way it's been divided and really carefully placed. Even here, there is a depth in the ground, which I thought was supposed to be for running the water, because I found some little places where the water was an escape way for the water, but feel like, because of the material that was used, there was never water that was like, used in these places. So these are some of the close-ups that I'm showing you. A few of the similarities that we are going to see in the fish sculpture and even in Terbela Dam, like, the way Zahoor handles the material, and then, the way it just forms these really ambiguous shapes. The sculpture itself is not very friendly to look at when you are in front of the sculpture, because you are not able to make out what it is. But it obviously shows a crescent and a star, and star is like a shooting star. And when you look at it from a distance, it's basically made to view from an aerial place. It has to have an aerial view. And while speaking with a lot of people, I was told that Zahoor was asked to make a sculpture on this roundabout, which was supposed to be seen from the Shakarpaniya hill. So that explains, like, the scale and the angles of the two, crescent and star. And then moving on to this image again. There has been a recent conversation about renaming this monument. It's usually now called as Chand Sitara Chowk, but in recent times there has been a conversation which is taking place in the Senate, where they are deciding to rename it and also add another monument, or the government may remove this monument to honor another lieutenant who actually gave his life. It was as a wing commander, Numan Akram, who died near the Shakarpaniya. And the late wing commander gave his life in March 2020 while flying an F-16 during the Pakistan parade practice. The pilot tragically lost his life as he was guiding the craft away from the metropolitan area. So the Senate has passed a resolution in November 2021 and proposed that another memorial will be built by either the Pakistan Air Force or the CDA, which is the Capital Development Authority, following clearance by the Capital Development Authority. They will be deciding whether they are going to remove this monument, but they feel that, there is no obligation to demolish it if they can create another memorial next to it. So a couple of more points I want to make before I move on to the Terbela Dam. One is that, of course, the monument was ordered to be made high enough to be seen from Shakarpaniya Hill. So there was a lot of criticism from the public that people couldn't make out what the monument looked like. It really has a great view when you're looking at it from a height, as I'm showing you right now. Zahoor probably took that as a cue to create something that is unusual, something that a common person is not comfortable looking at and making out the complete form of it. Although needless to say that the crescent and the moon the crescent and the star, I'm sorry, a common theme in the Muslim world and direct derived from the flag of Pakistan. The way it is angled and twisted, the elevations and the scale of it presents it as a shooting star meant to be seen aerially only and symbolically presents Pakistan on its rise with a shooting star. Even though the sculptural work is not free of his signature grid, that one is so familiar of his paintings, Chand Sitara becomes this image which has been angled in a very unique way that almost becomes a passage for somebody to walk over it and jump on a star. So I think whenever things come so close to the tradition, Zahoor flips it and gives it a new meaning, visually as well as intellectually. I'm going to move on to the second monument, which is the Tarbela Monument. And what you're looking at is the view of Tarbela Monument from the roadside. And I thought it would be good to see like how you can see it from that. This project was commissioned in 1983. And the project came to Zahoor through Madam Professor Nazish Ataullah. And Zahoor and Nazish formed a company which was called as ZN Associates. And through that, Wabda commissioned them a project. General Safdar Butt was the chairman who commissioned the project. The idea was to commemorate the 140 plus people who died in the making of the Tarbela Dam. Tarbela Dam is considered as one of the world's biggest mud dams that was made in Pakistan in 1960s. So overall, the Tarbela Monument is very minimalistic and simplistic, and it is about 160 feet tall. And the main area that you're looking at is this part, and then here that you look at this little cube back there is what bears the name of the martyred people. Of course, Zahoor was inspired by the sacred geometry. Kufic script is something that he was very drawn to, and this design was really talking to many people. They all indicated that he time and again said that this was based on a Kufic design. So overall, the Tarbela Dam seems like a very simplistic monument, but I want to show you a few images and then want to come back and discuss this more. This is how the dam looks like. I do want to say here that access to this monument was really difficult getting permission because now it is under army and it's a very restricted area. You have to get special permissions to get there. So it was not an easy journey to get there. So I'm showing you some of the maps that we found in the archive. And this is the design actually overall. So right here, you see the monument that's been erected, the tall one, and there is a water body right here. There is a water body right here. And then there is this walk and there are these steps. So this is a long walk and the whole environment was created. Initially, the papers in his archive shows that he was also supposed to design the restrooms, the cafe next to it. But I think at the end, only this part was what was designed by Zahoor. So let's look at a few pictures and then I come back and talk about this again. So the elements that I could not ignore while looking at this monument was that every single inch of this place was important for Zahoor, even the floor. When you look at it, and I'm going to come back to the maquettes again, these are the two fountains. So symmetrical placement of the fountains on the side. And it seems like as if the mukarnas were like put upside down or created upside down and create the sound of water when the water would flow. I think the idea was that one could hear the sound. So what came really obvious in these work was like the light, sound, water, the flow of light and water was really important for Zahoor. And here we're looking at the monument, a close-up of that. So these are the names of the people who died in the making of Tarbela Dam. I must mention that the initial color of this monument was not green, and it was actually, it had patina on it, but somehow the army decided that they want to make it more as a nationalistic symbol than Zahoor's work. One cannot ignore walking on the floor, on the ground, you see these tiles. And every single tile has this most remarkable markings on each one of them. It reminded me of Zahoor's paintings. And so I was told that he gave special instructions to the laborers to create these kind of markings and textures. This is a view of Tarbela Dam, how it looks like, and where the monument is placed. I'm sorry. So going back to this, I do want to say a couple of things about this project. One is that looking through Zahoor's archive, one can tell that he was constantly experimenting with various sizes, material, and different kinds of options, seeing like, what would work better for the models. So that is something that, you see time and again in all of these, through these maquettes that he created, even like looking at like wood that he created. So there's one of this size, but then there is another size of this. This was one of the aspect that, and then you look at all these sketches that you find in his archive. This is not.
Sorry to interrupt, Samina. You're at a 25-minute mark.
Okay, thank you. I do want to narrate a little anecdote that I came across during one of my interviews with Zahoor's student. His name is Salman Asif, and while we were talking about this monument, he narrated, and I think it's very interesting to see. He said that he witnessed a conversation between Zahoor Akhlaq and Scheherazade, and Scheherazade said to Zahoor Akhlaq that, I don't understand that you have made this huge monument, which is, you are going to make this huge monument, which is based on the Kufic design. And it just seems very two-dimensional. And Zahoor carefully listened to her. And then, so they're talking about this while they're standing with this maquette. So Salman said Zahoor kept listening, and after Scheherazade completed her remarks, Zahoor asked her, well, let's take this maquette in the sun. And they took it to a terrace, and he laid it out there, and he said, I think that the third dimension to this monument is the light. And the way the light changes and the shadows which are cast on the earth, that is the third dimension of the work. And so this is the kind of thinking that, Zahoor was going through, like, looking at the images, looking at the symbols of, like, the earth, and then the idea of like light, water, sound. All of these natural elements were super important for Zahoor. As I'm running out of time, I would like to show you a few more images of the other sculptures. So this one is the Indus Valley sculpture, which is made at the inauguration of Indus Valley. Some of the sketches, preparatory work for this sculpture. I was told that the monument was made first, and then it was just converted into like a monogram. But I differ with that. Looking at these sketches, I think that Zahoor very much knew how he was doing the monogram and the sculpture simultaneously. So these are a few of those work in progress. I do want to read this one statement, which really kind of sum up all of Zahoor's work in a way, like, in terms of his public sculptures. So I'm going to skip the first two lines, and I read that, the elements considered for the conception of an image to symbolize an identity for the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture are based on the primary sources of life. Water, a symbol of knowledge, its acquisition and dissemination. Waves, a cyclical motion. Tree, a symbol of growth of vision. And then this is really important. Geometric patterns unify space in a rhythmic order. Sculpted spaces symbolize the sky, environment, and limitlessness of human possibilities. And I think that very well captures what Zahoor used to think about human, limitlessness of these possibilities of seeing things and presenting things. I'm presenting this fourth one really quickly, going through this. This is the fish sculpture at the Maritime Museum, Karachi, made in 1997. And the most remarkable thing that I discovered while visiting this sculpture was that, the fish is placed a little off center. If you can look at these, I couldn't make this out while looking at the photos, but if you see it in actual, really beautifully placed, almost like the effect of ripples, and the fish is coming out of it. And then these are a few of the close-ups. You can see Zahoor right here. And again, the same practice for Zahoor, also dealing with the idea of concave surfaces that you see here, and also in the Chand Tara or the crescent star sculpture, and his continuous experimentation of figuring out what is the best material suited for these monuments. These are some of the sketches for this monument. So this is the last one that I want to show you. And again, the fact about this sculpture that, I'm not sure about the date. It has two dates, 1986, but 96 is when it was gifted to NCA. I have been told that the place where it was placed in NCA, it was actually modified because these two points, the wings were protruding out more, and they were a public hazard because of the placement of the sculpture. So they were cut down on the sides. And this was inspired by Zahoor's inspiration from Fasting Buddha. And so some places it's been called as Fasting Buddha, other places it's called as Invisible Buddha. I prefer calling it Fasting Buddha because I felt like, this just goes really well with his thought process and how he was looking at it, because all of these plates just seems as if like, these are the ribs for Buddha, and then, seated posture. And this is where the blades were cut off. Sneha, do I still have a few minutes or?
Samina, just 1 minute.
Okay. All right. So I'll just conclude my presentation with one of Zahoor's statement, and I quote, "For me, the act of making image is a commitment to a complex process in which a cross-section of the image maker is reflected. The mosaic of social interaction, intellectual environment, historical, cultural heritage constitutes an identity portrayed through the media, literature, music, dance, theater, or visual art. I have considered that an image created is always a self-portrait of its maker. It is an affirmation of living in a particular time and space." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Samina, for that wonderful presentation. I think there's a definite sort of way in which, especially in the context of newly emerging or nations that have newly emerged, newly formed, where public monuments, whether in the form of public sculpture, murals, and so on, they become so important as a way to put forward a vision. And I think for artists, they present such an incredible opportunity to work in scale. But I think what's also wonderful about your presentation is how you've sort of spoken about the contemporary life of some of these, these public works, and and whether it is in the context of, contemporary political life, where some of them may not be accessible to publics anymore, or in discussion, or even sort of the contemporary life of images as they circulate, and the new narratives and the new speculations sort of that they lead to. So thank you so much for this, both of you, really, for such incredible presentations. It's been so rich and wonderful to hear you both. I'd like to invite the audience to start sort of putting in your questions and your comments in the Q&A. And maybe just to get the discussion started, one of the questions that I had for both of you was that, there's this in recent sort of decades, especially as far as other disciplines are concerned, history, sociology, political science, a lot of these other sort of within the historical sort of disciplines. Among recent scholarship, there's been sort of a strong move away from archives to look beyond archives. And yet, I think, particularly in art history, as it pertains not just South Asia, but really much of the global South, as it were, the recent sort of few decades seem to be the archival sort of moment, as it were, where when new archives are emerging, people are, they're being made accessible, people are discovering new materials. So in this context, I was wondering, how has, for both of you, how has access to the archival sort of materials of Zahoor changed sort of perhaps the way that you read, you've understood, or you situate his practice? Whoever would like to go first. Simone, maybe could I invite you?
Yeah, thanks, Sneha, for the good question. I've written about Zahoor work quite extensively. And I have to say that having been able to access his photographic archive, I realized that there is a lot that you need to include when you speak about form and an artist's work, a modernist artist's work in particular. Just this travels to rural areas, not only in Pakistan, but the region and in Asia generally. I imagine that, I said it in the presentation, that I think his conception of space really comes from there. So this anti-hierarchical thinking, and I think there is a deliberation in that, really is something I would not have been able to come up with if I wouldn't have been able to see where he went, what he saw, and what he looked at, the details. That's really, really interesting. Another thing is, that there are certain regions, missing is not the correct word, but let's call it missing for the time being, missing in the archive. I mean, there are also no photographs of his journey from London back to Lahore in 69 via Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan. And I know that he went, again to Iran, Afghanistan. So, but still, I mean, the fact that there is hardly any material in the archive from visits to museums in Europe, in North America, I mean, I found that really, really interesting. And it's quite fits, with my reading of Zahoor's work anyway, but it just makes it richer. And I would, just would love to go back and then write about that.
So I think I would say that looking at Zahoor's archive, actually, really, like I said in the beginning of the presentation, I didn't realize like all these sculptures were made by Zahoor, except for Maritime Museum, because everybody, when you're passing by it, everybody says, oh, that's Zahoor's sculpture. But the Bela Dam or Islamabad, I have gone by that roundabout like so many times, never noticed it. Of course, I was in NCA, and being a naive 21-year-old, I never saw when the sculpture was installed then, 1996. But then, the archive actually provided a lot of clues about these sculptures, like, the working of it, a lot of material that, of course, this presentation was not so much in depth talking about his conceptual ideas and symbolism that was involved. I mean, I barely scratched the surface in this presentation, but there's so much more to read about. And a lot that came through his writings that we found. And of course, Zahoor was a person, and I think an artist at that time. None of them plan and leave things that, people would read after us. But, it's like really up to the researchers how they make and find these clues. Like I said, looking at Zahoor's quote on Indus Valley's prospectus, where he's literally defining what stands for what for him. But I think the archives really don't give a whole picture of it. They can give you clues. Like I mentioned, for this Islamabad, crescent and star monument, it was really strange that, there was not a single mention of this. But I think it also has to do that Zahoor never accepted that aspect of using that in his design. And then, the pictures that you find, there's no mention of that. This was totally an accidental thing that I discovered, that, oh, there was these pictures about it. So even when we were digitizing the archive, I realized that there wasn't very much of Zahoor's own artwork. completely, photographed, or, in the photo. So we have like 7,000 photos. I mean, there are like travel photos, there are family photos, there are friends photos, there's inspiration, there are references, other things. But not even like his prints or his sculptures that are like, very few people know about Zahoor sculptures. I'm not talking about the commission projects, but other sculptures. So I think the archive is also limiting, but at least a window to like, start your research, start looking at, it provides you clues, if I can just sum it up in that sense.
No, thank you. I think both of you. I think that's I think sort of I think it came through very clearly in your presentation, Samina, where it became sort of necessary, or that the archive was really a starting point to sort of to go out and look for more sort of information, but about works that you perhaps were not aware of until then. And whereas Simone, I think, it sort of takes you sort of I think in your process, because you've already been looking at his painting, his artwork, and so on. So the photography sort of the journey is reversed. It takes you back sort of the to relook at the at sort of how you situate, historicize, read his practice. So thank you both for that. We do have some questions in the audience, and I have some more questions for you, but I think since there are questions from the audience, we'll prioritize those. We have a question from Hamad. Hi, Hamad. Hamad says, thank you, Simone, for this rich reading. I'm struck by the parallels between your reading of Akhlaq's photo archive and that of Jolene Lowe's reading of Kim Lim's travel photos. Do you see the shared engagement with architecture in Asia as a diasporic impulse? Artists looking elsewhere for inspiration to supplement a limited Euro-American canon they were being fed at RCA or Slade in London?
I don't know Jolene Lowe's reading of Kim Lim's travel. I look it up. Thanks for mentioning that. I think supplementing, yes, but also making a decision in, where to locate your work. And then probably, yes, Hamad, you're right. And there must maybe a diasporic incent here possible. But I think that's what, you would also find in artists who, I'm thinking of the Jewish diasporic community during 1938 and 1945, dispersed across the world. There were lots of photographic archives. I know that from many of these artists, North America, South America, across Asia also. I don't know if I can agree with you. I look it up. Thanks for mentioning it. Yeah. Good to know.
There's a question here about sort of there being very limited scholarship thus far about Zahoor's printmaking practice and whether the archive includes a complete documentation of his prints. Perhaps Samina would be the best person to speak about this, and I think she just in fact touched upon it. Samina?
Yeah, exactly. I think, unfortunately, not much. So I do have to tell you this, that, while I was student at NCA, I met Zahoor Saab twice in my life. And the one time that I remember, he came to the studio and he asked me, like, what are you working for your thesis? And I, being really naive, I'm like, oh, I'm making these etchings. And he said, have you thought about like doing mezzotint? And I had no clue of like what mezzotint technique was. And then he very politely explained me, this is how you do it. You have the plate black, and then you, with the light, you take out the image. And I still feel like, this idea that, he was so engaged with the idea of light, that he was like, also like teaching that to the students. So to go back to the question with the prints, unfortunately, we have some prints, but I have not found any plates. But we did find some drawings, some sketches of some of his prints, but not very much. I was also taken aback. I was in Paris last year, and I found 2 of his prints in Paris Public Library the National Library of Paris. And I was able to photograph them. I never saw these work ever in his archive or anywhere else. So there is a lot that is missing. So this is why I said when we talk about the archive, it's really just it's an opportunity to have that clues, to go from there. But unfortunately, no documentation, no solid documentation of his prints. And I think also the fact that he was a kind of a person who wouldn't really care about I'm not saying it in a negative way, but in a way that he was more very Sufi kind of a person who wasn't so much involved in promoting himself and making sure that his work is documented. So that is also part of it, that we don't see his prints very well documented. Even for the paintings, I would say I've come across every now and then paintings of Zahoor which I've never seen before, not in the archive, nowhere else. So yeah, it's something that one has to continuously work towards it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Samina. Yeah, indeed. I mean, no archive is really ever comprehensive. So, yes. We have a question from Kevin, who says, thank you both for the insightful presentations. Having traveled extensively, did Zahoor Akhlaq express his thoughts in art and writing which were ahead of his time and which were considered eccentric? I also read that Zahoor had a tragic passing. Was there a political motivation? Either of you to take this question?
I can just say a little about his writings. We're still reading, like I said, this is work in progress. We only worked for about 6 months on this, which included the travel and everything. And there's so many of papers. So I must first say that, Zahoor was not a kind of person who has written proper diaries or leaving what I'm working on and leaving notes. So you find many hundreds of pages which are some pages would just have a stanza narrated on it, like a poem or something that inspired him. Like last night I was reading, there was this very beautiful game that, kids play, and he had used that to express his wish for using water as a symbol of something that he was really inspired with. Lots of writing and no cohesiveness in a sense that, because like I said, no artist leave anything that you're going to make a book out of it or read it as a book. So there are clues and given things that, you can look at, and you can, so for instance, I was just reading, there was this one little scrap of paper which said something about his idea of symbolism, and he says, and I'm going to read this, it's right here, it says, a symbol is yesterday, today, tomorrow in a divine form. And that's just a line written there about his thoughts on symbolism. So I think there are lots of his writings there, and of course he was ahead of time because he was not doing traditional things in that sense. He has used tradition to make things really pop out in a very different way. For example, when I talked about Tarbela Dam and I showed you the little cube that he had made to commemorate the people who died making that dam, the flipping of that cube on its axis on one angle was kind of unconceivable. And now you see a lot of designer doing that, but we are talking about 1983 when he made this. And it just had this could be an inspiration that could have come from his writing in terms of looking at Urdu or Arabic writing, where that cube was just maybe a dot, a nukta that we call in Urdu practice, or mashq, that, it would be just one nukta that he's used. So, I mean, you find these kind of clues that you see in the archive. And of course, one needs to do a lot of work in reading them. And they are written in Urdu. Some of it is in English, but mostly in Urdu. So translation would be required to better understand those. And is that all the question, or is?
I think maybe Simone, if you would like to sort of add something to this, I think that would also be.
Yeah, no, I think everything has been said, but perhaps I wouldn't consider him being eccentric. Ahead of time, yes. I mean, his painterly practice, his artistic practice, also sculpturally practice was ahead of time. And, he is not only considered, we know that he was very much responsible of giving a direction, of shaping the direction of, that art was taking in Pakistan since the 1960s. And then there was also opposition, we have to acknowledge that, but, opposing something is also very important. So yes, ahead of time, I would certainly agree, but I would probably not think of him as someone eccentric. There were other figures in Pakistan who, would probably deserve eccentricity as a label.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, I think what's also interesting in, certainly in every artist archive, but also in the context of Zahoor, seems to be that each archive sort of also opens us up to wonder what constitutes writing. What forms does writing take within an archive? And it's not always essays, it's not always, articles, essays, full-fledged, but really sort of even, whether it is notes that he was making, in preparation for teaching, whether it is, letters and proposals for projects, because there's a lot of conceptual writing that I came across within the archive, and it elaborate sort of, and very fine conceptual writing. So I think, that these kind of archives also push us to think about what are the forms in which, what are the forms of writing that exist within archives, within artistic practices that we are yet to sort of identify as writing per se. So, I'm aware of time, but we do have a few more audience questions, so I'm going to take those up. So we have a question from Lisa. This is Lisa Dams, director of the Hauser and Wirth Institute. Hello, Lisa. Lisa says, it's so exciting to see the discoveries you were able to make via the archive. Thank you for your scholarship. My question was also going to be about how absences within Zahoor's archive shaped your work. Can you talk about what other forms of research you undertake to address archival absences? Perhaps we could start with you, Simone, and then move on to Samina for this. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm aware that this is not an artist archive in the sense that I have come across an artist archive in other parts of the world where an artist, consciously set up an archive, which looks very different to this. And I'm totally aware of that. In terms of absence, for me, the absence is, what about the photographs? When I talk about travel, right? What about the photographs from the places that you visited, but they aren't there? These for me are absences, clearly. Another thing would be, I would have loved to, engage also with the people that he met. Just thinking about this extensive trip to India in 1991, all the artists that they hung out with and that, whose studio they visited. Just that would be a different topic. And I'm sure there are a lot of absences in that also that one would like to, address. So, maybe the missing places for me related to what I was speaking today. I think there will be other evidences also.
Yeah. Thank you. Samina?
I think this is what I was speaking in my presentation also, was like, what was missing was like, I tried to take that as a cue and then, look for those fill in the gaps sort of things with like, through oral histories and interviews that I conducted with lots of friends and people around Zahoor, and also trying to find what is happening simultaneously with other artists, working at the same time, even like, knowing that Ahmed Khan, an artist who was working with Zahoor, I also, contacted a number of people that has worked with Zahoor, like Salimur Rahman. He was like assisting him while making these, so the absence is of course always going to be, in any archive, like there would never be a ideal archive, but I think one has to find ways to use what is given and really push forward using those sources to find other kind of like, research venues. But for me, oral histories has worked really great. Word of mouth, like interviewing people, has really filled in a lot of gaps, and it's still work in progress. So I can't say that I'm done, like, exploring all these projects. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you, Samina. Yeah, I think absolutely. I think it was, and in fact, both of you, I think, touched upon something that I was also interested in knowing about, which is that very often when we focus on when we, at least at Asia Archive, when we're building archives of individuals, personal archives, what we also get to see are those those milieux within which these artists were situated. Who were the other people that they were talking to, and not just artists, often writers and musicians and filmmakers and just people of all kinds, poets, and I mean, so and I think that is something that either one finds, it is definitely something that one finds within the archive, but also sort of is something that, as part of, I think, art historical research anyway, is something that one does, which is to talk to people and to sort of try and fill in the gaps. I think is is definitely sort of important. I'm afraid we've run out of time completely, but I do want to maybe just, there's one comment by Noor Jahan. Noor Jahan is here. Hi, Noor Jahan. Noor Jahan writes, it's not so much a question, but I think it's an observation from her. She says, thank you both for your presentations. I have something to add regarding the archive and also artwork photography. She says, Samina said that the archive is incomplete, and I think that is true. Things have also been lost over time. And I like to think of the archive as a record that has survived with many gaps and missing elements, definitely. And regarding artwork photography, she says, I disagree. Many works were photographed by him, but not a complete inventory. But the images have not survived due to discoloration and deterioration over time. Thank you. Thank you for that, Noor Jahan. Absolutely. I know we have many more questions, but I am aware of time and I'm aware of people who are joining from across different time zones. What we will do is to sort of take note of these questions and pass them along to our speakers so that they are able to think through these. But for the moment, I am sort of going to call this evening to a close. Thank you so much, Simone and Samina, for your wonderfully rich presentations, and to our audience for your engagement. I'm sorry about those who had questions and comments that we were not able to take. The Zahoor Akhlaq archive will be launched soon on Asia Archive's website, so do stay tuned. Our thanks once again to the Hauser and Wirth Institute, and in particular to Lisa, who joined us this evening, for their generous support to the archive. And finally, I'd like to thank the working group at Asia Archive for this event, Osge Ersoy, Rebecca So, and Lily Wong. Thank you all and have a very good day.